So, hello everyone. I'm Robin Zimmerman along with Janet Porter, who is my colleague. Welcome to the Women's Association of Hilton Head Islands author series. This is actually our 17th session, our 17th webinar. I cannot believe it. Can you, Janet?
We're getting to know each other, aren't we?
We're getting to know each other. I think we're getting into, a nice rhythm here. Happy Veterans Day. I do want to do a little shout out to my son, who's in his 20th year with the Air Force. And I'm very, very proud of him. Started out in the Citadel, and then he was a commissioned officer, and he's of course been all over the world, but he's now at the Pentagon finishing up, and he'll retire next year. So
oh yeah, my gosh, has he been all over the world, Robin?
Yes, he's been UAE, England, 4 years in Germany, of course Afghanistan, Iraq. He's a civil engineer. And so he loves working on projects like the airport, the maintenance and the airport runways and all of that sort of thing, logistical kinds of things. So he's a great leader. Of course, he's my son, so I'm a little partial.
Well, probably like a lot of our visitors today, I've been thinking about my dad. My dad was in World War II and was in the Battle of the Bulge and was in Germany when the camps were freed. And, I think today is always a wonderful day to pause and think about those we know and love who served and what a difference it made in our lives.
Yes, I know. It's an important day. And we're excited to have two authors with us for this series.
Victoria, we're going to ask you to turn your video off for right now, and we'll come back and I'll introduce you and then you'll open up. Perfect, Victoria. Thank you. Go ahead, Robin.
And we want to turn on the closed caption too, Janet. You see that little quick chat. So yes, we have Marie Benedict and Victoria Murray. So the book is called The Personal Librarian. And we're very excited to meet both of them. I think this is the first time we've interviewed two authors at the same time.
It is the first time we've done that.
And Victoria Murray is a writer and written over 30 books. Of course, Marie Benedict, a very well-known author. So we're very excited. We will start promptly at 5 o'clock with our interview. And of course, Janet does a great job of our interviews. And so we'll start at 5 o'clock. But until then, we're gonna do a couple of polls. We want to remind you that we have the chat button there if you have any thoughts, questions, comments for the authors or for us. Nancy Fish, of course, is our technical guru. She is online. And of course, Bobby Helbig is your colleague in this author series that we've been doing now for almost 2 years. So it's a wonderful piece outlet for many of us as we still continue to be in kind of the COVID world, but we're coming out of it. So that's a good thing. And it's just been the author series has been fantastic. So how have you been, Janet?
Well, I've been good. And I wanted to talk about something that maybe most people haven't had a chance to do. We've lived here 9 years, Robin, but we just recently, WAHI just offered an opportunity to members to go behind the scenes at the Carolina Arts Center. And wow, was that interesting. They're doing they were doing kinky boots. And I've never been on a behind the scenes tour before at the Carolina Arts Center, and we'll offer that opportunity again next year. And it's a perfect lead in to the fact that there's lots of ways to celebrate and recognizing the arts. And I know that we're going to be talking about the arts at the WAHI December luncheon, and that you're on the planning committee, Robin. So you want to talk a little bit about that luncheon, because I'm excited to hear about the resilience of the arts during COVID.
And that's our theme, resilience, of course, for the full year. But for this particular luncheon, it's resilience of the arts. Claudia Aller is, of course, she's our president, will be our president-elect for next year. She'll be our president next year. She's leading our committee. We've been in planning for over 6 months. I'm very excited. We have 3 very special guests, panelists that I'll talk about in just a moment, but it'll be on December the 9th. It'll be at the Sonesta Hotel. It'll be the first time we're actually inside since COVID began. We'll have the luminaries from the fantastic lantern parade will be decorated, of course, in the Christmas decorations and all that. So it'll be just a magical day. magical luncheon. And our guests are three individuals from the arts world. And we'll be talking about how they have survived during COVID from the film perspective, from the film perspective, from the theater perspective, and the music perspective. So we have Mila Lerner. She's the chairman of the board of the Lean Ensemble, which is a very avant-garde, phenomenal theater group, community theater group here on Hilton Head Island. She is, as I said, chairman of the board, but she's also a producer from Broadway, from New York. Broadway, remember, shut down in March of 2020, and finally this fall has revived. So she can talk from the local perspective, how theater has survived, and then she'll also talk about the national perspective, particularly with Broadway. Then we have one of my dear friends from Beaufort. His name is Ron Tucker. He is the CEO and president of the Beaufort Film Festival, or Film Society, and the Beaufort International Film Festival. So he, again, will take a look at film and movies and how, we've kind of not been going to the movies, but we've been at home streaming film on our televisions. So he'll talk local, then he'll also talk about COVID and the resilience in the film and movie industry. And then we have an interesting individual. Actually, I've not met him. His name is Jordan Ross, and he is the owner of the Roasting Room, which is a musical venue in Bluffton. And I just have to tell you his title. It's very interesting. He's a director. No, he is the captain of live acoustical taming and talent acquisition at the Roasting Room. So go figure. But we're also going to welcome Jen McEwen. She is the director of cultural affairs for the town of Hilton Head, and she'll be talking about 2022 and really what's in store for our community. So it's going to be a wonderful luncheon. We're excited. We're at the Sonesta. We'll be celebrating the holidays, and we're asking all of our members to bring in a wrapped gift labeled with boy, girl, and age for the Children's Center and Bluffton Self-Help. So again,
Sounds terrific.
And that same day, we have our last for this year author for 2021.
Yes, and we'll have Sarah Penner then,
yes,
who's the author of The Lost Apothecary. And Bobby Helbig, actually my co-chair, is actually going to be doing the interviewing for Sarah Penner, and she couldn't be more excited that, Sarah's going to be with us. So we're not going to be doing polling today. We're just going to chat, Robin.
Okay.
So, one of the things we've learned over the last 18 months is how important it is to have something to look forward to on our mental health. And the arts obviously offers that, something exciting to look forward to. And so one of our questions today was, our audience says, we want to know what the audience is most interested in learning about relative to the resilience in the arts. So we'd like you to chat in. And the way you do that is by putting your cursor on the toolbar, either at the top or the bottom, and then just typing your answer in. And so our question is, are you most interested in learning more about the arts relative to the theater or art museums or music or dance or film? So just chat in, just type in your answer. Theater, art museums, music, dance, or film. What are you most interested in learning more about? And we thought that might help you, Robin, as you plan the lunch, to think about how to approach it. So we have Meryl saying theater, and
and there's Nancy has put that in the chat. We're getting more theater.
And Anita says theater. Fred says,
Everybody
Fred and Alice say theater. Cindy says theater. So good. I think the Lean Ensemble person will have a lot to contribute. Robin wants to know more about art. But continue to chat in. We want to hear from you on that.
Right. Well, it's been an interesting transition because they basically had to shut down because the venues are indoors and people could not gather inside because of COVID. And then they had to really analyze as they began to open up. How do you social distance? Do you require masks? So that's, one thing in particular, the Lean Ensemble, as they opened up their season. And actually, Claudia and I went to the Thanksgiving play several weeks ago, and they do require masks, and they also ask that you're vaccinated because all of the artists, all of the actors are all vaccinated. And so they asked the audience members. And so we did have to show proof of vaccination to go to the Lean Ensemble. And it's been an interesting discussion about what kind of restrictions do you need to put on as people begin to gather indoors in particular, and also during the holidays. You see, we're we're back and it's getting a little cooler, so we're all hovering inside. So I heard yesterday that there were still, I don't know, Janet, 50,000 people every day in the country that are contracting COVID. So we just, and of course, Wahi's been amazingly careful. We want to put the health and wellness of our members first and foremost as we move forward with our first internal inside event at the Sonesta. So
Yes. And we were at a dinner with 340 people Friday night. And one of the major people notified us on Sunday that they had felt sick on Saturday and tested positive for COVID on Sunday, fully vaccinated. So, it never helped. It's, I think it's important to be safe rather than sorry.
exactly.
So I feel good about the caution we're putting into the December luncheon, and everybody will know that everybody there is vaccinated. And I think that really will hopefully make people feel more secure coming.
More secure. And so also at that chat button, you can make a recommendation for a book that you've read or a book that you would like to have one of your colleagues read, or friends or neighbors or family members. So just use that chat button for questions, comments, recommendations, anything you would like.
Robin, I want to add to make sure people use it for questions, because Victoria and Marie want to hear from you. So I'm watching the chat function right now. So as you come up with your questions, we'll fit those in. So please chat in. We love for this to be interactive. So Robin, it's been great chatting with you, and I think it's about time to get started. So I'll sign off.
Okay. Welcome everyone to the 17th edition of the Women's Association of Hilton Head Islands author series. We're so excited that you have joined us. You are in for a treat. We actually have two authors for today's session. We have Marie Benedict, who is an esteemed author, very, very well known, and she has co-authored a book called The Personal Librarian with Victoria Murray. So it's going to be interesting how the two of them collaborated on this particular book. And so we'll meet them in just a moment. I'm Robin Zimmerman. We again appreciate you joining us. And at this time, I'd like to bring in Janet Porter, who will actually be conducting the interview with our two authors. Janet, it's good to see you again. Just come on, there you are.
Robin, it's good to see you. I'm so excited to hear from our authors today. I found The Personal Librarian that we're going to be discussing really compelling. Marie is really committed to shining a light on extraordinary women in history who've lived extraordinary lives and oftentimes gone unrecognized. And so I've been a fan of Marie Benedict's books, and I've actually read The Only Woman in the Room, The Other Einstein, Carnegie's Maid, just to name a few of the books she's authored. But for this book, Maria determined that she needed a co-author. And so she was so fortunate in telling the story of Bella DaCosta Green that she was able to collaborate with Victoria Murray, who in her own right has written 30 books and is a well-known author. And so I'm going to ask Marie and Victoria to join me now.
Okay.
There's Marie and there's Victoria. Nice to see you both. I'm going to do a little introduction of both of you. We want to hear from you, so they won't be too lengthy, but let me tell you a little bit about them. After graduating from a law school, Marie spent 10 years as a litigator at two prominent national law firms before she realized her calling was to unearth the historical stories of women. Her mission is to excavate from the past the most important, complex, and fascinating women of history and bring them into the light where we can appreciate their contributions as well as bring insight into modern day issues. Many of you may not know that Marie has also written books under the pseudonym Heather Terrell. So those of you who've read her books and like her, you might look up Heather Terrell also. So Victoria Murray, who's a native of Queens, earned a bachelor's degree in communication disorders from Hampton University and an MBA from New York University. She spent 10 years in corporate America, kind of like Marie did before she saw the light, before she launched an entrepreneurial venture, which is a financial services agency where she managed the #1 division for 9 consecutive years. She's been dubbed a Christian fiction writer because no one else was written about, and because no one else was writing about religious topics. Victoria trailblazed the literary scene, penning more than 30 novels, co-writing with other authors, and oftentimes ghostwriting for top talent across the countries. 2 of her novels have been made into TV movies for Lifetime, And her novel, Stand Your Ground, won an NCAA award for outstanding literary work fiction. And that's just one of the many awards she's received. So welcome to both of you. So let me just start by asking, where are both of you right now? Marie, where are you?
I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And Victoria, where are you?
I'm in Washington, D.C.
So through the miracle of Zoom, we're all together. So
Thank
that's
goodness for
terrific.
Zoom.
Thank goodness for Zoom. Yeah. So, let's have each of you tell a little bit about your experience, because both of you had these kind of completely different lives and then had an epiphany where you decided you wanted to be a writer. So would you both, we love to hear about how that epiphany happened. So Marie, you want to go first and tell how you decided that was really your calling?
Sure. It's well, really, how long do you have, Janet? Because I could go on about that for ages. For me, it kind of started way back in middle school, not to go too far back or to tell you the year that happened. But I actually had a wonderful aunt growing up, and she kind of kept me in books. I was a voracious reader. And I read this one book that maybe some people out there have read. I sometimes come across somebody who has. It's called The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. And it was groundbreaking for its time. It was a historical retelling of the Arthurian legend. So instead of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, you had Guinevere and his sister Morgan Le Fay. Now, we read books like that right now. I write books like that now, but nobody else was doing it. And it planted this seed, this love of history, in particular women's stories. And I went off to college and I became a history major, kind of following on that passion, thinking that maybe that I'd become a professor. But at that time, if you were a history major, the thing you'd hear most was, what on earth are you going to do with that? And you should probably go to law school. So I ended up kind of getting on that train, and I ended up doing really well. Worked as a commercial litigator in New York City for over a decade, but I knew it was never really what I was supposed to be doing. I knew that I still had this passion for history and these stories. And so I one day had an idea. I never set out to be a writer, but I had an idea for a book. And I wrote it in bits and pieces over probably an 8-year period. And eventually, I kind of made that leap from the world of lawyering to the world of writing. And so I've been fortunate that since I did that, I worked as a lawyer for 11 years, and I've been doing this for longer now. And I just feel so fortunate that this is what I get to do for my career. So that's kind of how I came from one totally different profession to another.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We love to hear those journeys. So Victoria, tell us about your story.
Well, I wanted to write my entire life. I knew, I always say that I came out of my mother's womb knowing I was going to be a writer. My parents used to say, especially my dad, that whenever they would read to me, I wasn't interested in hearing the story. I wanted to know, how did the words get on the page? What happened with that? My father said he knew back then. And I wrote my first masterpiece when I was 7 years old. And people say you can't write a masterpiece when you're 7, but you can if you plagiarize. And I wrote something called Betty and the Witch, and it was about a girl who went to school in a red uniform with a hood. She had 3 bears for brothers, 3 pigs were her sister, and next door, 7 little people lived. I had a good witch and a bad witch, and everything I had ever heard, I guess, by the age of 7, I just put it all into a play, gave it to my parents. My mom thought it was wonderful, turned it into my teacher, and she read it, and then the entire 2nd grade performed it as a play.
At the age of 7?
At the age of 7. And a few years ago, I said to my mom, man, I wish we could find that teacher. So Mrs. Asness could see what she created, what she helped to do. And even though I've always wanted to be a writer, I had never met any writers though, growing up. So I never thought of it as a career. I couldn't see it as a career. I didn't see anyone else who was writing. And so I ended up going to college, majoring in communications and doing other things, but I never lost that desire to write. The desire was in me. And my husband, I got married to a man who believed in my writing. In fact, he bought me a computer for a wedding gift. And it was one of those Apple IIe's. I actually found a picture of it the other day. It was as big as any room that you're in right now. And you had to put in the disk and take out the disk and put in the disk. And that's why I never wrote. It took too long to heat up. But my husband said to me at one point, you know what? one day you're going to be 80 years old and you're going to have this as a regret that you didn't go after the one thing you wanted to do your whole life. And so that's what I did. And I finally wrote my first novel, and I've been writing full time for over 20 years.
Well, you don't know who is on the webinar today, who has that in their gut, and who you're inspiring to like really give it a chance. So thank you very much for sharing those. So Marie, let's talk about the personal librarian.
Yeah.
So let's start with the fact that, how did you come upon the story of Bella DaCosta? And then how did you decide you wanted to write her story? And then how did you decide you needed a co-author? So talk about all that.
Sure. Well, so I feel like Belle has been with me for a very long time. She actually has been with me for decades. When you've heard a little bit about my background and how I was a New York City lawyer, not happy in my profession. I would kind of sneak out during the day and take graduate classes at NYU and Columbia as I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. But one of the things I would also do is go out to the different cultural institutions in New York City, the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Morgan Library and Museum. And I would go there. I mean, for those of you who've never been there, Victoria's heard this a million times. I like to describe it as like a jewel box. I mean, it really is. It's one of the most stunning spaces I've ever been in, and probably, except for Trinity Library in Dublin, I'd say it's probably the most gorgeous library I've ever been in. And I used to go there in particular because I could really envision a whole different life for myself when I was in that space. And one day, I couldn't even tell you the year because I'd been there so many times. I happened to have a discussion with a docent. She had finished up giving a tour, and we were talking about the collection. For people who haven't read the book, the Morgan Library houses one of the world's best collections of rare and priceless manuscripts. Those illuminated manuscripts that you've seen, the early printed first editions of books, really it's the history of the printed word. And we were talking about the collection, and this docent mentioned to me that it had not just been formed by J.P. Morgan himself. And I should back up a second. The Morgan Library was built by J.P. Morgan, the famous financier and industrialist. He's famous in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He built it in 1905, 1906. And it was really designed just as his personal library to house his collection. This docent told me that a woman had also had a huge role in creating this collection. She mentioned her name, Belle DaCosta Green. And I knew that it was remarkable that a woman in the early 1900s was not only running one of the world's best collections for J.P. Morgan, who was, one of the most famous and important men in America at that time. And then in the years that followed, that she became this powerhouse. I knew that was remarkable. So as I kind of turned from lawyering to writing, Belle was kind of always on my list, right? I always kind of was fascinated by her. And as the years went on, and this is what I do with all the women that are on my list, I kind of dip into information about them, dip into the research. And as the years went on, more and more came out about Belle. I realized that she was not just remarkable because she was a powerhouse at a time when women couldn't even vote, right? But that she actually was hiding her true identity, that she was actually a Black woman passing as white, and that she came from this rich, rich heritage. Her father had been the first Black graduate of Harvard. He was this fierce advocate for equality. Her mother came from this rich cultural, multi-generational family from Washington, D.C. that had been free for generations. She came from this rich, important background. And yet, because the time period she lived in was segregated, she was forced to hide her identity. And when I started to learn that, the woman who I thought was remarkable became just astonishing at the end of that. And I knew I wanted to tell her story even more, but I also knew that Belle deserved to have a Black woman tell her story alongside me if I was going to be one of the ones to tackle it. I, as a writer of fiction, you mentioned, thank you, Janet, that you've read some of my other books. I can imagine a lot of things, right? I can imagine myself coming from different countries, different backgrounds, different time periods, but I can't imagine what it would be like to be a Black woman in this country then or now. And so it was around this time I was considering, having a partner for the book. And I read Victoria's book that you mentioned, Stand Your Ground, which if you haven't read, it's so good and so important. It looks at this terrible problem of the shooting of young Black men from the perspective of the women in the young boy's life, his mother, and the wife of the police officer that shot him. And I just thought, my goodness, she's writing contemporary fiction. It's different from what I'm doing. And yet she's looking for these different perspectives, white and Black. She's looking at the perspectives of the women. In many ways, Victoria was doing kind of what I was doing, what I wanted to do with this book. And so through our agents, I reached out to her. I kind of sent a treatment about what I was thinking about for the book. I didn't know her. I thought I knew her because I'd read her book, but I really didn't know her. And I took this bold move of seeing if she had any interest in writing it with me. Now let Victoria take it from here, because this is her part of the story now.
So Victoria, you need to unmute because you're muted.
I'm sorry, yes. So yes, I take over from here. So I received this treatment from my agent, and she said, I want you to think about this collaboration, which was interesting enough. I'd done a collaboration before with another author. And I said, okay, who is she? She told me Marie Benedict. I had not heard of Marie. I can't believe I hadn't, but I hadn't heard of Marie then. So the first thing I did was I Googled Marie. And when I Googled her, I found out that she wrote about these wonderful women who had been lost in the folds of history and everything. And that sounded great. But I was like, what does it have to do with me? And then I did notice that she was not Black. She was white. So I called my agent back and I said, okay, so this treatment, have you read it and everything? And the big thing I want to know is, does Marie know who she's reached out to? Like, has she seen a picture of me? Does she know who I am? My agent said, yes, she knows exactly who you are. Would you read the treatment? Well, it still took me about 2 months I know, Marie says it really was about 3 months to read the treatment, because the first page was just about JP Morgan and I wasn't interested. I just could not get into the treatment. I wasn't interested in him. And finally, my agent said, because I kept saying I was too busy, I would read it soon. I was too busy. She said, no one is too busy to read 3 pages, read it. And so I read it, and the second page got a little bit more interesting because now it was about Belda Green. And finally, and I always tease Marie about this, she hid the lead. The last paragraph said, and no one knew that Belda Green was Black until she passed away. And I sat straight up in the chair. I couldn't get to the telephone fast enough. And I was like, please, please, please don't have me have messed up this opportunity, because reading is fundamental. That's something that all authors should know. And so I didn't do that. But once I read it, our agents connected us, and I knew right away that I would want to do it with Marie. Once we talked on the phone, within 5 minutes, I knew. She had never done a collaboration, so I wasn't sure if she knew, but I knew not only that I wanted to do this, I knew that we would do a good job on this together.
Well, let's talk about that collaboration. How does it work to co-write a novel? As Robin mentioned at the beginning, you are the first co-author team that we've actually had speak to our author series. And so I think most of us can imagine writing a book, but maybe we don't ever do it, but we imagine it. But most of us can't figure out, does one person write one chapter and one person write the other, or how that works. So talk about how that collaboration between the two of you worked.
Well, I knew, as I said, I knew we could do it because I had done them before, and there's no collaboration that ever works the same way. There's no rules or regulations. Like Marie and I are so alike, but one of the ways that we're different is that she is a lawyer. So everything, goes in order, and how were we going to do this? And I was like, girl, we're just going to do it. We're just going to work it out. So one of the things I think I'm most proud about with this book is every word of this book we wrote together. Every single word we wrote together. We would talk over each chapter extensively. Like today we were on the phone forever, and I didn't even realize for our next project. And then depending on what the scene was, it was really easy, right, Marie? We would determine who would do the first draft. And then we'd write it and then we'd switch and give it to the other person. And we were able to bring our strengths to it that way, because one of Marie's strengths is that she's a historical fiction writer. And so she writes dialogue that's appropriate for the time period. Well, I'm a contemporary fiction writer. And so there were times when I just wanted Belle to say to JP, "What's up, dude?" And then Marie would go in and with her magic brush, just fix it. And then I was able to, I hate writing first drafts, but I love doing the rewrites. And so I was able to just go in and build, and it was just wonderful. What do you think, Marie?
Oh my gosh. It was, we went into it, first of all, I looking back on it, I was so audacious. Like I'd never written I'd never done a collaboration. I had no idea if Victoria would be interested. I just kind of plunged into it instinctively. But I knew as soon as we started talking, like Victoria's goal, we were actually just talking about this today. Her goal was really the same as mine, which was to do justice to Belle DaCosta Green. And there's sometimes the writers can have a lot of ego in the process. And both Victoria and I really approach it from the same perspective. We just want to write the best story possible for Belle. We did that in our new book. We just want to write the best story possible for our characters. And, having that as your core objective, a shared objective where ego is checked at the door, it's such a unique experience. You really form an immediate bond of trust between you. And that's so critical because sometimes, there's going to be a section where, you think you need to go in a different direction than the other person might think so, or research might yield something that's really something you hadn't contemplated and quite different than what you had mapped out. And knowing that the other person really just has the best interest of the book at heart, not, a certain ownership of a particular chapter or phrase. Honestly, looking back on the book now, I couldn't tell you who wrote what, because
I know.
Right? I mean, our process, and Victoria did tell me there's no formula. I was looking for a formula that, to really sit down and discuss each and every chapter, to then kind of decide who felt more inclined or more appropriately skilled for a particular chapter, and then to switch it in terms of editing. It really allowed us to have each of us to have a hand in the entire thing. And it's unique and unusual, I think, for two people to write a book that has one voice. Most often you'll see two people collaborating on a book that has multiple voices. So, it was probably pretty unusual for us that to be our first collaboration, but it was it was just such a joy. For me personally, the experience of writing this book, yes, I'm so happy that we did justice to Belle and that people are seeing her at the Morgan. We get pictures all the time of people sending us pictures with their personal librarian going to tour the Morgan Library. It's so rewarding. But for me, the most important thing that happened from this book is my friendship with Victoria. Really, that's just been the biggest gift of it all. But the collaboration really was a beautiful process, really was.
So you guys had to really paint Belle in the picture of somebody who was young, a woman in a man's world, because this book starts in 1905 and goes throughout the next, I think, how long was she JP Morgan's personal librarian? How many years, Marie?
Well, she served in the role as director of the Morgan until the late 1940s, after World War II. He died, I think 12 years was it 12 years into that process? No, less than that, 9.
Yeah, because he died in 1913.
Yeah, so I'm not good at math. Can you tell that? 8 or 9 years into that process, but she was in the role that she assumed really for the remainder of her life.
Yeah, like her whole career. So you had to paint this woman both in terms of being young, a man in a woman in a man's world, going to Europe, out bidding at big international auctions for the prized possessions for the JP Morgan Library. And then, but you also had to provide this challenge that she was a Black woman passing as white.
Mhm.
So how did you and Victoria think about bringing out all those dimensions of her character?
Well, I'll just leap in at one part of it. I mean, I think certainly one part was easy for both of us, and that was a woman in a man's world. You know, when Victoria and I both started working, you know, again, I'm not going to say exactly when that is, but it was certainly not as common for women to be in the business world or women to be lawyers. I mean, we were really at the beginning, not the
Yeah.
very beginning, obviously. We weren't like, you know, the
Mhm.
trailblazers, but sort of the beginning of that. And I think both of us have talked extensively over time about the fact that so often we found ourselves to be the only woman in the room. For me, it could be a courtroom, a conference room. The lawyers I worked with very often, my clients, very often men. You know, I worked in the corporate world. And at that time, most of the men in leadership, most of the people in leadership roles were men, and certainly the partners at my firm. So it was definitely not a leap
Yeah.
for either one of us, I don't think, to imagine what it was like to feel like you were the only one in that context. It was definitely, obviously, elephant in the room. I am not Black, in case you guys didn't notice, but
I'm
I,
white.
she's not white. But we, you know, for me to envision what it was like to be a Black woman pretending, passing as white, I could only look at it from a historian's point of view, right? You know, we researched that extensively, right? Because one of the tricks, the challenges that we faced in this particular book was that Belle did not leave any record of that. You know, it's very true in the book at the beginning and the end, we have her burning her papers, all of her correspondence, her records. And, you know, we don't know why she did that because, of course, she burned whatever letter she might have written describing that. But the Belle that we think we know burned all of those records because she didn't want anyone to find out that she was actually Black. It would have tarnished her legacy at that time because when she died, the world was still very segregated. And she had made the sacrifice to pass, giving up her family ties, giving up having a family of her own for the legacy of the Morgan Librarian. She did not want to do anything to sacrifice that, right? So for us, given that we didn't really know how Belle felt about it, we had to take what we do, what we talk about doing in moments like this, which is take what you've learned about the character through the information you do have about them. What I love to find as a historical fiction writer are letters, journals, accounts, things like that. We were kind of limited here because there's not a lot of that. But there are things, newspaper reports, things that people had said about her during that time period to cobble together what we understood was her character, right? And then we researched a lot about what it was like to pass during that time period, what people experienced. There's a wonderful book by a woman named Allison Hobbs, who she studied extensively lots of accounts of people who passed during that time period and what their experiences were like, the sacrifices they made, the terrible toll that it took upon them to walk that tightrope of passing. But nothing compared, that's all, you know, historical. That's all, extrapolation from the facts. That's not knowing. And Victoria had so much personal experience as a Black woman in this world and your own family's experience. I don't want to speak for her. She can go. But, you know, I mean, and that was, oh my gosh, so informed, Belle.
And I think you can speak because, you know, like my grandmother was very, very, very fair and she would pass for convenience. In fact, I sent Marie a couple of pictures of her so that we could have a picture because she was around, around Belle's age, but we used her as like Genevieve so that Marie would have a picture of what Belle's mother would look like. And my grandmother would pass for convenience. And what I mean by that, and what my grandmother meant by that, is she never corrected anyone. If she went into a store, or if she went into the bank, if she went anywhere, she never corrected anyone if they assumed she was white because she got better treatment. In fact, my grandmother lived on Morningside Drive in New York, which At that time, I know she got that apartment because people thought she was white, even though her children
Wow.
were brown skinned, because my grandmother was very, very, very fair and my grandfather was very, very, very dark. But this amazing place where they lived, there was no, Black people wouldn't have lived there. And so it was very easy for me to do that part because I'd had so many discussions with my grandmother about it, with my grandfather about it. And we talked, it was an open, it wasn't a secret. It was just something that was open in our family. So it was very easy to put a lot of the feelings that Belle was going through, I knew.
And so, so your grandmother who could pass, and your grandfather who you said was very, very dark, both lived in this neighborhood where it wasn't really integrated?
It wasn't really integrated, even when, and I think about this, I'm the granddaughter. And even so, by the time I came along, and my mother had lived there, I think like from early, before teens, like 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old. So all that time my grandmother lived there, by the time I came along, there still were very few Black people in that area.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. What a rich dimension then you were able to bring.
Yeah, it was very easy for me to talk about because I had lived it, but I also remember telling Marie that there were very few people my age, very few Black people my age, who didn't know someone who passed.
So then, Victoria, tell me, when you were researching Bella's life, given this background, what about her life surprised you? Was there something that really surprised you the most?
I think what really surprised me, I really learned why people passed, even though we didn't know for sure with Belle because she never told us how she felt about it. We don't have anything, but we could extrapolate from her family this rich history of the Fleet family, all being educated, all being a proud Black family. They had been freed Blacks for such a long time. And then her father and who he was, it wasn't that they were escaping to become white. They were escaping to become equal. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that, I guess the biggest thing that surprised me in this book was learning how much her mother had been in the civil rights fight with her father.
Yes.
She had gone down to South Carolina. She had stood side by him. She believed in the fight. And then when they were run out of South Carolina, when they were chased out, I think that was the beginning of her saying, oh my God, do I want my children to have to live with this?
Right.
And so that was the beginning of it, we believe, until she slowly said, I don't want to be white, I want to be equal. And that was the only thing she had to use.
Right, right. And so you guys also wrote this book during COVID partly, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. That's the thing that changed everything, didn't it, Marie?
It sure did. I mean,
so talk about how that changed everything.
I mean, I think, do you want me to start with this one, Victoria?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, I think when I look back on the writing of the book, it really was in two phases. You know, the first phase was kind of what we described with the writing process, but it wasn't done like we are today, right? We weren't using Zoom. I know it was out there, but I don't know, I wasn't using it. It was, you know, phone calls and we did meet and we emailed and absolutely by the time we turned in our first draft to our editor, which was probably around December, January, before COVID, we felt like we had delved deep into the life of Belle, that we had a good solid story. And I still maintain that we did. We had it, but you know, what happens typically, and I'm sure you've heard other authors talk about this, that's the first stage in the process. And the edits that you get back from your editor for the first time are really the most consequential, deepest edits you're going to do. And we got those back really right before COVID. And it was the lockdown, the shutdowns. That's where we were when we really started to work on it. And so for the first time, we were working like we are today. I mean, Victoria and I are so used to talking to each other this way because we do it literally all the time. Not just for speeches, just for regular life. So, I almost feel like for COVID, it was like Victoria said this a lot, but it was like my family and Victoria, we were in lockdown together, even though physically we weren't there. Victoria was like very much present in my house because she was so around so much. So it was she and I on the Zooms, chatting, working through the edits we had to make. And it's very much, for us, it's very much a collaborative process, right? It was very much, and of course we were dealing with the changes that our editor was suggesting. And but it was more than the change in communication. It was the change in what was happening in the world around us. Suddenly there's social unrest everywhere. It's on the news. We're all home, so we're watching it all the time, in addition to COVID coverage. And suddenly the racism and the horrible segregation and violence that we're seeing, that we've been examining from a historical perspective, is suddenly in the news. And all the things that Genevieve Fleet we're trying to avoid, that our characters were dealing with, it were suddenly very real and very immediate. And,
Wow.
and Victoria and I are then having, we had obviously talked about racism, but it was mostly from a historical perspective up until that point. Suddenly we were talking about our own perspectives and own experiences with racism. And of course, Victoria had that in abundance. And it changed the book. It changed our friendship. It really just, I don't know. What do you think, Victoria?
Yeah, I always say Marie and I spent almost 3 hours just about every day over the summer of 2020 working on our book. And we were already talking about race. But when the George Floyd incident happened, I was able to say, see, this is what Genevieve, this is why she did it. This is why. This is what she was trying to prevent for her children. And then we ended up talking about race from both of our perspective. And what was so interesting is that people would assume that Marie learned the most about race. That's what people would assume. That's not true. I learned just as much as she did, because you can't have a Black woman and a white woman who already respect each other spend every single day for months talking about race and not have it change them. You cannot. And not talking about race on the surface. This is something I think we talked about today or yesterday. We talked about that to this point, we both have friends of the other race, but a lot of the talk had always been on the surface, because you don't want to, and that's not what you want to talk about with your friendship, with your friends. But Marie and I had to go deep for our book, and because we were watching it on TV every day. And we had to talk about, and then when anything happened, we both immediately thought of the other. I know people always would think that Marie would have to drag me from the edge, but just as many times I had to stop her from getting in her car in Pittsburgh and driving to New York. I was like, Marie, it's COVID. You can't do that. But because of that, we went from friends. I really loved her, but when we finished the first draft, we went from friends to she's my sister. And I'm not just saying that.
No,
I mean, if something happens, she's usually the first person.
Same. Absolutely. I mean, she used to deal, poor Victoria's had to deal with so many travails this year with my family. I think I've said this a lot, I think, but you can't really shift the way that you look at race unless you love someone or are very close to someone from that background, right? And I love Victoria, so I can't not look at the world from her perspective. I mean, that completely changed. Whenever something would happen, I would think, well, well, how could they do that to Victoria? Right. It was it was like all about Victoria. But I really do feel that. And if we, so that was such a gift for me that she trusted me enough to open that part of her life up, and share it with me and change me. And those changes, we hope worked their way
Into the
into
book.
the pages of the book. And then we hope that people get together and have those conversations, and they'll form those same connections and can look at things differently themselves and have those kinds of changes too.
What a beautiful, touching story the two of you have about partnership and collaboration. And, as somebody who read the book and appreciated the book and has discussed it in 2 different book groups,
Oh.
I wish everybody that are in my 2 book groups could have heard this presentation today, because I think it would change their, like, the majesty and the magic of your relationship is a big part of the story that doesn't come out in the book.
Really is.
And that's why I'm sure you're both very powerful speakers when you speak. And I can't tell you, I know that you're both working on other projects together. And I so hope we'll get a chance to talk with you again. I know, Marie, we're scheduled to talk with you in the spring. And I'm so grateful that you joined us today. We have a big audience, and I'm sure they really appreciated hearing from you. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
And so now I want to turn it over to Robin, and Robin's going to talk a little bit about, is going to introduce Betty Hamilton. So Robin.
Janet, I just have to tell you that I think of all the sessions that we have done, this was the most powerful in so many ways. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you for your friendship, your sisterhood. I have not read your book. I'm going to get the book tomorrow, first thing. I cannot wait to read it. Thank you so, so much. We appreciate you. And the women of Wahi appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks so much.
At this time, we'd like to bring in our president, Betty Hamilton, who's going to talk a little bit about what is coming, events coming up with Wahi. So Betty, it's all yours, my dear.
Thanks, Robin and Marie and Victoria. Oh, what a wonderful, joyful afternoon we've had with you. Marie, I've read several of your books. I look forward to your next collaboration, but what a beautiful story you each tell, and something that about your relationship that we all need to take to heart. Thank you so much for being with us today. I want to say, Robin, you did a magnificent job at the beginning of this program talking about the Wahi holiday luncheon that's coming up December 9th. So I won't go into elaborate detail about it because you sure did. And you were able, I'm sure, to get a lot of our viewers, if they haven't already registered for it, excited, and that they're going to go online and register tonight. It's going to be and as you have said, and as I've written in an article today, a magical afternoon, a magical event. So please remember to log on to the website and register for December 9th at our holiday luncheon at the Sonesta Hotel. We're also going to have some other little things going on that day. I'm not going to divulge any secrets, but it's going to be fun. So I look forward to seeing all of you there. The other thing that's coming up a little bit, actually a week before that, is January 2nd, we're going to have a shop for a cause, and it will be at J. Banks Design on Main Street. And if any of you have, I know you all know J. Banks is a premier design firm, but if you haven't been there, they have the most magnificent gift selection and gift store. So hold off on your holiday shopping a little bit. And when you go there, it will be all decorated for Christmas. You'll have wonderful gifts to choose from. And Linda Dreisbach and I will be there from about 4 to 7. serving up some champagne and holiday goodies. So we'd like to see you there, but you can shop all day. And the best part about your shopping adventure that day is that J Banks will be giving you a 20% discount on your purchases, and 10% of all sales that day will be coming back to Wahi for the benefit of our Youth Service Award program. So we look forward to those two events. I know there's a lot going on in Wahi right now with our interest groups in full gear. There are so many activities, competing activities, and we just hope that you're enjoying yourselves, that you stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you on the 9th of December.
Thank you, Betty. I cannot wait for the holidays. We have Thanksgiving coming up 2 weeks from today. I can't believe it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Victoria Murray, Marie Benedict, what an amazing discussion. Of course, we do record all of our author series sessions, and you can find that on our website. And the best thing you can do is buy the book, The Personal Librarian. Also, Bobby Helbig is our colleague with Janet Porter, who did an amazing job on the interview. She is looking for any other suggestions, recommendations for other authors that we can have in our series. So with that, we are looking forward to December the 9th. As Betty said, that is our luncheon at the Sonesta. And then later that afternoon, we will have the Lost Apothecary author, Sarah Penner, and she will be interviewed by Bobby. So with that, have a wonderful rest of your Veterans Day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Robin Zimmerman. Bye. We'll see you next time.